Xiao He.
Do not trust the system's lies.
I was 3 weeks behind on rent when the notification showed up in the corner of my eye like a dropped contact lens. Crime system activated. Host, Xiao He. Welcome to your first roll. I was sitting in my dorm room in Ursa at the time, eating cold noodles out of the container, trying to figure out which of my textbooks I could sell without my professors noticing. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, checked if I'd fallen asleep with the lights on and was dreaming. I hadn't. The words just sat there, white letters hanging in the air a few inches from my face, not moving when I moved my head. Okay, I said out loud, to nobody. Okay, that's new. I want to be honest about something up front, because I think it matters for everything that happened after. I didn't feel scared. I felt relieved. I'd spent 2 years watching other students at Ursa Polytechnic land internships at talent agencies, get scouted off the street by Starlight Theater recruiters, disappear into the entertainment machine that ran this country, while I sat in a room that smelled like instant noodles and old socks, failing to be interesting to anyone. When something tells you it's going to fix your life, you don't ask a lot of questions. You just say yes. So I said yes. The notification changed. First contract available, the pickpocket. Under it, a description: steal an item of value from a target without being caught. Reward, skill, sleight of hand, novice. I laughed. I actually laughed, alone in my room, because it felt like a joke my life was playing on me. Steal something. That was it. That was the entry fee into whatever this was. I didn't do it that night. I want that on record too. I sat with it for 2 days, turning it over, telling myself I wasn't the kind of person who stole things. But rent doesn't care what kind of person you are, and on the 3rd day my landlord left a note on my door that used the word eviction, and something in me just went quiet and practical. There was a Market Street 2 blocks from campus, the kind of place where vendors sold fried dough and phone cases and knockoff jackets, where the crowd was thick enough that nobody looked at anybody's hands. I picked a target almost at random, a man in an expensive coat, arguing with a vendor about the price of a scarf, not paying attention to the bag hanging open at his hip. I don't remember deciding to move. I remember my hand was already inside the bag before I'd finished thinking about it, and it came out with a wallet, smooth as if I'd done it 100 times before. The man never looked over. I walked for 6 blocks before I let myself breathe normally. Contract complete. Skill acquired, sleight of hand, novice. And then, underneath, I felt it. Not learned it, felt it, like a muscle I'd always had but never used, suddenly warm and ready. I flexed my fingers on the walk home and they moved differently. Looser, smarter. I threw the wallet in a bin 2 streets over, keeping only the cash, and told myself that was the last time. It wasn't. My roommate at the time was a chemistry major named Gene, a kind, oblivious guy who noticed exactly nothing was wrong with me for the first 2 weeks, mostly because I made a point of it. You seem different, he said, on the 3rd or 4th contract, watching me count out cash on my bed that I very obviously hadn't had the day before. Picked up some tutoring work. Tutoring what? Statistics. I didn't even hesitate saying it, and that bothered me more than the lie itself did, how easily the system's skills had already started dressing themselves up as ordinary talent, how quickly lying convincingly had become just another thing I was apparently good at now. Gene shrugged and went back to his textbook, and I remember feeling something close to disappointment that he hadn't pushed harder, because some small, honest part of me wanted somebody to catch me before I got any further in. Nobody did. The system kept feeding me contracts: pick a lock, tail a stranger without being noticed, talk my way past a guard outside a private club I had no business being near. Small thefts. Small deceptions. Nothing, I told myself, that actually hurt anybody. Each one gave me a skill, and each skill made the next contract easier, and somewhere in there I stopped thinking of it as stealing or lying and started thinking of it as training. I told myself I was becoming someone capable. Someone who could finally stand out. I called my mother during that stretch, mostly out of guilt, and she asked how school was going in the tired, careful voice she used whenever she was trying not to ask about money directly. It's fine, I told her. Actually, things are looking up a little. Looking up how? I picked up some extra work. Nothing official yet. I'll tell you when there's something to tell. She didn't push either. Nobody in my life pushed, that whole first month, and I've had a lot of time since then to wonder whether things would have gone differently if just one person had. I should explain how Eridoria works, for anyone who's never lived here. We don't have wars. We don't really have crime, not the kind you'd recognize. Violence has been illegal for almost a century, ever since the consolidation, when the old warlord states got folded into one government and one economy, entertainment. That's not a metaphor. Entertainment is the actual economy. Nova is where the money and the stages are, all lights and towers and theater districts that never go dark. Ursa is where the rest of us live and work and study, the commercial gears that keep Nova's furnace fed. And Tenebrous is where you go when you want the things Nova won't admit it wants. Fights. Blood. The stuff that's supposedly been bred out of us. Because here's the thing about outlawing violence, you don't kill the appetite for it, you just push it underground and put a price tag on it. Tenebrous has fight pits where men and women beat each other for money in front of small, quiet, very rich crowds. It has private theaters showing unscripted footage nobody asks too many questions about. Officially, none of it exists. Everybody in Nova knows it does. I'd been to Tenebrous exactly once before the system, to watch a friend lose money on an underground fight. I hadn't liked it. Something about watching real pain for entertainment sat wrong with me, even when I badly needed the free drinks that came with the ticket. Funny, looking back, how strongly I felt that. Funny how little it ended up mattering. The first time the system offered me an audition, I almost didn't believe it was connected to the same thing. New opportunity. Starlight Theatre is casting for The Collector, a villain role in an underground production. Recommended skills detected. Audition location attached. I went, mostly out of curiosity, and mostly because I had $4 in my account and nothing better to do with my afternoon. The audition wasn't in Nova. It was in a converted warehouse on the Ursa Tenebrous border, the kind of building that had a legitimate business name painted on the outside and something else going on inside. A woman with a clipboard and a bored expression waved me through with barely a glance. The director's name was Han Wei, and he looked at me the way you'd look at a piece of furniture you were deciding whether to buy. "Read the sides," he said, handing me 2 pages. The scene was simple. My character, the collector, was interrogating someone who owed him money. I read it cold, no preparation, and something happened that I still can't fully explain. It wasn't like remembering lines. It was like the system had already given me the performance, the way it had given me the pickpocketing, and all I had to do was let it out. Hanwei stopped me halfway through the 2nd page. "Again," he said. "But mean it this time." I did mean it. "No. You performed meaning it. Do it again, and actually be him for 10 seconds. I don't know what changed between that reading and the next one. But something in my chest went cold and still, and when I said the lines again my own voice sounded wrong to me, flatter, colder, like somebody else had borrowed my mouth. The actor across from me, playing the debtor, actually flinched. Not stage flinched. Real. Hanwei was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Who trained you?" "Nobody," I said, which was almost true. "Well, somebody's going to want to now." He tossed the sides on the table. "You start Thursday. Contract complete. Skill acquired, Menace, novice. Bonus, stage presence, novice." I walked out of that warehouse feeling like I'd swallowed a live wire. For the first time in my life, somebody had looked at me and seen something worth using. The productions in Tenebrous weren't like anything shown in Nova's official theaters. They were called unscripted intensity pieces, sold to a small, wealthy, very secretive audience who paid enormous sums to watch performances that blurred, deliberately, the line between simulated and real. Nobody would say out loud what that meant. I didn't ask. I told myself the blood was corn syrup and the screams were acting, because that's what everyone around me seemed to believe, or pretended to. My first real role was small. The collector had 4 scenes, 2 of them violent, 1 of them fatal. I remember being nervous before we shot the death scene, more nervous than I'd been about anything in my life, because some part of me that hadn't caught up with the rest of me still expected there to be consequences for pretending to kill a man in front of a paying audience. There weren't. Or there weren't any I could see. The victim. An actor named Bo, thin, nervous, always chewing his lip between takes, got up after the scene, wiped fake blood off his neck, and asked me if I wanted to get a drink after. We went. He was fine. He was more than fine, he was buzzing with the same electricity I felt, telling me this was the best gig he'd had in years, that Hanwei's productions paid triple what legitimate theater work paid, that if I stuck with it I could be set for life. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The clip of that performance, a 12-minute private release, my face barely visible under stage lighting rigged to obscure identity, circulated in ways I didn't understand yet. Underground entertainment moved through channels I couldn't see, private auction houses, subscription feeds routed through shell companies, word of mouth among people rich enough not to worry about the law. Within 2 weeks, Hanwei told me people were asking for me by name. Not my real name. I'd been billed as the collector, and nobody in that world used real names if they could help it, but a reputation had formed anyway, fast, the way fire catches on dry grass. New opportunity, recurring role, the collector. Reward scales with performance intensity. I said yes again. Of course I did. For the first time in my life, money wasn't the problem I fell asleep thinking about. The second production was bigger, and it taught me something about how the whole business worked that the first one hadn't. Hanwei paired me with a woman named Ada, a veteran of the Tenebrous circuit who played the collector's rival in a script about competing debt collectors carving up the same territory. She was good, better than good, precise in a way that made everything she did look effortless, and she took me aside before our first scene together with a warning, dressed up as advice. Whatever the system's given you, she said, low enough that Hanwei's assistant couldn't hear across the room, don't lean on it too hard too fast. I've watched 3 of Hanwei's rising stars burn out in under a year. They go from novice to headliner in a handful of productions, and then they're gone, and everyone just says they moved on to bigger things. Moved on where? That's the question, isn't it? She said it lightly, like she didn't quite believe her own unease, and then she went and performed the scene with me like nothing was wrong, sharp and focused and utterly convincing, and I told myself she was just an older performer resentful of somebody new climbing faster than she had. The production went well. Better than well. The private feed sold out its subscriber tier in under a day, and Hanwei took me to a small, expensive dinner afterward to celebrate, the kind of restaurant in Nova where the menu didn't list prices. You have something rare, he told me, over food I couldn't have afforded a month earlier. Most performers spend years learning to disappear into a role. You already know how. I want to build something around you, Xiao He. Something bigger than the collector. I should have asked him, right then, what bigger meant. I didn't. I left the wine and the warm restaurant light and the sound of my own name said like it mattered carry me past the question, the same way I'd let 3 weeks behind on rent carry me past my first contract. I met Lin Feng during my 3rd production. He was the star of Hanwei's roster before I came along. Tenebrous' most requested performer, the closest thing that underground world had to a household name, though almost nobody in Nova would have recognized his face. He was older than me by maybe 5 years, handsome in the particular, sharpened way that comes from a person who has spent a long time being looked at, and he did not like me. You're the new one, he said, the first time we shared a green room. He said it the way you'd describe a stain. Xiao He. I know what you're billed as. I asked Hanwei. He was reapplying something to his jaw in the mirror, not looking at me. He tells me you didn't train anywhere. No academy, no company, nothing. I guess I'm a natural. That got him to turn around. Nobody's a natural at this. You understand what this actually is, don't you? I understood what I'd been told it was. I didn't answer, and something in my silence must have satisfied him, because he turned back to the mirror and said, almost gently, in a voice that wasn't unkind so much as tired, enjoy it while you don't understand it. It gets harder once you do. I didn't know what to make of that, and I didn't get the chance to ask, because Hanwei came in calling places and the moment closed like a door. We were cast opposite each other that night for the first time, playing rival collectors circling the same debt, and something happened on that stage I hadn't felt with anyone else. Lin Feng didn't perform against me so much as he pressed against me, testing, the way a good sparring partner tests your guard instead of just trying to land a hit. By the end of the scene I was breathing hard and so was he, and the small crew watching from the wings had gone completely silent in a way that told me we'd found something they hadn't expected. Afterward, in the green room, he looked at me differently. Not warmer, exactly. More careful. You held your own, he said, like it cost him something to admit it. Thank you. I didn't say it as a compliment. I said it because it means Hanwei's going to use you harder now, and I don't think you understand yet what harder is going to cost you. He gathered his things, paused at the door. Enjoy it while you don't understand it. It gets harder once you do. He'd said it before. He said it again like a warning. He expected me to eventually earn the right to understand, and left before I could ask him to explain it. Lin Feng and I ended up cast opposite each other more than once after that. Hanwei liked pitting his best performers against each other, said the tension read as real on camera, and maybe it did, because I never had to fake how much I wanted to prove myself against him. Off stage, he kept a careful distance from me, polite, watchful, the way you'd watch a dog you weren't sure was going to bite. It took me a long time to understand that what I read as jealousy might have partly been something closer to worry. By the time 3 months had passed, I'd moved out of the dorm and into an apartment in Ursa with an actual view of the skyline, the kind of place I used to walk past and assume was for people fundamentally different from me. My mother stopped calling to ask when I was going to get a real job, because I was finally sending home more money than she made in a month, and when she visited that spring, she stood in my kitchen looking around like she'd wandered into somebody else's life. Tutoring pays this well now, she asked. I picked up some consulting work too. Corporate stuff. It's boring, mostly. She didn't push, the way nobody in my life pushed that whole first year, but she looked at me a beat too long before she let it go, and something in that look stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. You seem tired, she said instead. Are you sleeping? I'm fine, Ma. I wasn't, particularly, by then. I'd started having the kind of dreams that dissolved the second I woke up, leaving behind only a feeling, heavy and metallic, like I'd swallowed something I couldn't name. But I told her I was fine, because that was easier than trying to explain a feeling I didn't have words for yet, and she left 2 days later reassured enough to stop asking, at least for a while. I think about that visit more than almost any other memory from that year. Not because anything dramatic happened in it. Because it was the last time she saw me and didn't sense, even a little, that something in me had already started changing shape. The investigator's name was Melan, and I didn't meet her until much later, though I learned afterward she'd been watching my rise for months before we ever spoke. She worked for the Elysium Bureau of Public Order, the branch of government that technically existed to enforce the ban on violence, though everyone understood its actual job was to keep Tenebrous black markets from ever growing large enough to embarrass Nova. She was younger than I expected when I finally saw her, shark-faced, unglamorous in a way that stood out in a country obsessed with performance, and she had a reputation, I heard this later, from people who knew her, for being one of the only people in the bureau who still believed the job meant something. She'd been pulling autopsy reports for 8 months by the time our paths crossed. Small numbers, easy to miss if you weren't looking, performers in the underground circuit who died shortly after a role, officially of accidents, overdoses, unrelated causes. Nothing that connected on paper, except that every one of them had worked, at some point, for Hanwei. She kept a private file on her own machine, not the bureau's, because she'd already learned that anything she filed officially had a way of quietly disappearing before it reached anyone who might act on it. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, at that point, was that I'd started having a problem, and the problem was that I no longer entirely trusted my own memory of what happened during a performance. It started small. A blackout of a few seconds during a fight scene, waking up mid-motion with no memory of the choreography I must have just executed. A taste in my mouth I couldn't place. Once, coming off stage after a role where the collector strangled a man in a warehouse, I found a bruise on my own knuckles that the script hadn't called for. Ada noticed before I said anything to anyone. She caught me backstage after that same performance, studying my hand where the bruise had already started to darken. That wasn't in the choreography, she said. It wasn't a question. I don't remember doing it. Something closed in her face, quick and final, like a door somebody had decided not to open again. Ask Hanwei about the echo flux, she said. The real version. Not the one in the investor materials. And then she walked away before I could ask her anything else, and 2 weeks later Hanwei's assistant told me, in the same flat tone she'd later use about Bo, that Ada had taken a break from performing to focus on other projects. I never saw her again either. I asked Bo about it instead, the actor from my first production, the one who'd played the collector's first victim. He laughed it off at first, said everyone got a little lost in the moment, that's what made the performances good, but when I pushed, something shifted in his face. You should ask Hanwei how the echo flux actually works, he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone. Not the marketing version. The real one. The what? The technology. The thing that makes the productions feel real without anybody actually, he stopped himself. Actually what? He looked at the door like he expected someone to walk through it. Forget I said anything. Ask Hanwei. Or don't. Probably better if you don't. I asked Hanwei anyway, the next day, cornering him in his office between calls. The echo flux, he said, like he was choosing each word carefully, is proprietary technology. It's what lets the productions read as authentic without anyone getting hurt. That's the whole value proposition, Xiao He. That's why people pay what they pay. You don't need to understand the engineering to drive the car. Somebody told me people have died. Hanwei's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. People in this industry die the way people in any industry die. Accidents, bad luck, bad habits. If you're asking whether I've ever hurt a performer on purpose, the answer is no, and I'd thank you not to repeat rumors that could get this entire operation shut down and every one of us out of work. He said the last part slowly, and I understood it as the threat it was. Where's Ada? Ada decided the pace didn't suit her anymore. He said it smoothly, without a beat of hesitation, and that smoothness bothered me more than anything else he could have said. These are adults making their own choices, Xiao He. I don't chain anyone to this stage. I let it go. I want to be honest about that too, I let it go not because I believed him, exactly, but because I didn't want to know the answer badly enough to risk what I'd built. It is a specific, ugly kind of cowardice, choosing not to ask a question because you're afraid the honest answer will cost you something you've started to love. I'm not going to pretend I didn't do it. The old woman found me instead of the other way around. She was waiting outside my apartment building on a night I remember mostly for how cold it was, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather, standing so still that I almost walked past her before she said my name, my real name, not the collector's. Xiao He. I stopped. Do I know you? No. But I know what's using you. She had a voice like dry paper, careful and precise, the voice of someone who had rehearsed a speech many times in her head before finally getting the chance to say it out loud. The golden finger, the system. May I speak with you somewhere warm? I should have walked away. Every instinct I'd built up over a lifetime of being a broke, cautious, unremarkable college student told me to walk away from the strange old woman on the sidewalk. But the system had given me instincts too, by then, layered over the old ones, and those instincts told me she wasn't lying, and that I needed to hear what she had to say. Her name was Yoon. She told me this in my kitchen, over tea I made with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, and she told me the rest of it in pieces, like she was deciding how much I could carry at once. There was a cult, she said. A long time before the consolidation, before this country had the name Eridoria at all. They believed violence carried a residue and energy left behind by the act of taking a life, something they called the echo. They built rituals around collecting it, sustaining themselves on it. Most of what they built was destroyed when the old warlord states fell. Most of it. And the golden finger, the system, that's them? The system is a fragment of them. A tool built to find hosts who could generate large amounts of echo quickly and efficiently, and this is the part that matters, Xiao He, without the host understanding what they were feeding. She watched my face while she said it, like she was checking how much had already landed before she went on. Every skill it gives you is real. Every contract it completes is real. But what it takes from you, and what it feeds elsewhere, is also real, and it does not ask your permission. Feeds what? Where? The resonance nodes. They're old sites, scattered through what's now Eridoria. Some of them buried under Elysium itself, ironically enough, right under the government that thinks it eliminated all this. Every performance you give, every unscripted intensity piece, isn't just theater with good technology behind it. It's a ritual. The blurring you feel, between the role and yourself, that's not an accident of good acting. That's the mechanism. The stronger you play the part, the thinner the line gets, and the more real echo the performance produces. I sat with that for a long moment, turning her words over the way I'd once turned over the system's first contract, 3 weeks behind on rent, telling myself this couldn't be as bad as it sounded. You're telling me people really are dying, I said. In the productions. I'm telling you that some of them are, yes. Not every time. Not even most of the time. Probably the cult's remaining architects are patient, and they don't want to burn out a good host too quickly. But the trajectory only moves one direction. The more famous you become, the more intense the productions demand you be, the more the system will ask of you, and the less of the difference between fiction and fact will survive the asking. Why are you telling me this? Why not go to the bureau? Something moved across her face that I didn't have a name for yet, grief, maybe, or guilt. Because I was one of them, once. A very long time ago, in a different life, before I understood what we were actually doing to the people we called hosts. I have spent the years since trying to undo a small part of what I helped build. You are not the first host I've found. You may be the first one who listens before it's too late to matter. How many others were there? Before me? More than I've allowed myself to count. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, but something underneath it had the weight of a number she carried around with her every day. A handful listened, eventually, and survived. Most didn't listen in time. I try not to think about the ones I found too late to matter, and I fail at that most days. I didn't believe her completely, not that first night. It's hard to overturn a life you've just started to enjoy on the word of a stranger who showed up on your sidewalk. But I stopped taking new contracts for a week, which was the longest I'd gone without one since the system first spoke to me, and in that week I noticed things I'd been too busy to notice before. I noticed that my blackouts during performances had been getting longer, not shorter. I noticed that I couldn't clearly remember the ending of my last 3 roles, only the beginning and the applause after. I noticed that when I tried to picture Beau's face, the actor from my first production, the one who'd warned me to ask about the echo flux, I couldn't quite do it anymore, and when I asked Hanwei's assistant where Beau had been lately, she gave me a look I didn't like and said he'd moved on to other opportunities, in a tone that closed the subject before I could open it further. I went looking for him myself, on my own time, using skills the system had given me for exactly this kind of quiet, careful searching. I found his apartment. I found it empty, rent unpaid, his name already stripped from the building directory, like he'd been erased rather than moved. A neighbor, an old woman folding laundry in the hallway, told me she remembered him being taken away one night by 2 men in plain clothes who didn't look like movers, and that she'd assumed, at the time, it was none of her business. I didn't find him. I want to be clear about that, in case anyone reading this account is waiting for a body, a confirmation, a clean answer. I never found him. I only found the shape of his absence, and I let myself draw the conclusion Yun had already handed me, because by then it was easier to believe her than not to. That same week, alone in my apartment, I did something I still don't fully understand. I picked a fight with nobody, practiced, in the mirror, the choreography from an old scene, slow and deliberate, trying to feel for the scene Yun had described, the place where the role stopped being pretend. About halfway through I lost several seconds the way I lost them on stage, and when I came back to myself my hand was against the mirror hard enough to crack it, my knuckles bleeding, no memory at all of closing that gap. I sat down on the floor of my own apartment and cried for the first time since the system had spoken to me, not because I was in pain, but because some very quiet part of me finally understood I wasn't fully in control of my own hands anymore, and had maybe not been for a while. Melan approached me for the first time about 10 days after that. She didn't come to my apartment. She was too careful for that, I understood later. She didn't want anything as visible as an investigator's visit showing up on whatever surveillance the Bureau's own compromised officials might be watching. Instead, she found me at a coffee shop in Ursa, the ordinary kind, full of students who had no idea who I was under the stage name, and sat down across from me like we already knew each other. "You don't know me," she said, before I could ask, "but I know a version of you that doesn't have a name yet in my files. I've been calling you Subject 7. I'm sorry? 7 performers in the underground circuit, in the last 2 years, whose deaths were filed as unrelated accidents. I don't think they were accidents. I think they were productions that went further than the survivors were told they would." She said it flatly, without drama, which somehow made it land harder than if she'd tried to make it sound frightening. "I think you might be next, and I think you might also be the first one who could tell me enough to stop it before that happens." I should have denied everything. I'd had enough practice lying by then. The system had given me a whole skill tree for exactly that. But something about her flat, tired honesty made lying feel obscene. "What do you want from me?" "The truth about what happens on those stages. Names. Locations. Whatever you know about who's funding it, and who in Elysium is protecting it, because someone is. A black market this size doesn't survive on secrecy alone, it survives on the right officials being paid to look the other way." She leaned forward slightly. "And I want you to stop performing before whatever this is finishes what it started." "Why me? Why not one of the others you've already lost?" "Because they were already gone by the time I found their names." "You're not gone yet." She said it without softening it, and I understood, sitting across from her, that this flatness wasn't coldness. It was the only way she'd found to carry this many names without it destroying her. "I've watched Han Wei build 3 stars before you. I've watched all 3 of them stop being people the industry talked about in the same way, right around the time their productions got a certain kind of attention. I don't want to watch a 4th. And if I say no? Then I keep investigating without you, and I probably get to you too late, the way I got to the other 6 too late." She didn't say it as a threat. She said it like a fact she was tired of being true. "I'd rather not add your name to that list, Xiao He. For what it's worth." I didn't give her an answer that day. I told her I needed to think, and she let me go without pushing, which I understood later was its own kind of strategy. She was patient in a way that made her more dangerous to the people hiding things than someone who pushed too hard too fast. She did leave me with one thing before I stood up to go. "Whatever this is using you for," she said, "it's escalating. It always does. You have less time than you think you do to decide what you want to do about that." Lin Feng cornered me the same week, in the green room, with a version of the same question dressed in different clothes. "You've slowed down," he said. "Fewer contracts." Han Wei's noticed. He doesn't like it when his best assets get cold feet. "Maybe I have a lot on my mind. Maybe you finally asked the question I told you not to ask." He studied me for a long moment, and something in his careful, guarded face finally cracked open into something more honest than I'd ever seen from him. "I lost someone to this, a long time before you showed up. His name was Kai. A partner. We came up together, in this business, and then one production went wrong and afterward he wasn't all the way himself anymore. Then he wasn't anything, not long after that." "What happened to him?" Specifically, Han Wei told me he'd overdosed. I believed that for exactly as long as it took me to see the state of the room he supposedly did it in, which was nowhere near messy enough to have actually happened the way they described it. He said it without theater, which somehow made it worse. I've spent every production since then trying to figure out how much of myself I'm allowed to keep giving to a role before there's nothing left underneath it. I still don't have a good answer. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" "Because Han Wei owns half of Tenebrous private venues, and the people who fund those venues own half of Elysium's bureau, and I have learned, the hard way, exactly how much it costs to say things like this out loud to the wrong person. He glanced at the door, the same instinctive check Bo had made before he'd tried to warn me. I'm telling you now because I think you're smart enough to have already figured out the parts I'm not saying, and because Hanwei's about to offer you the role that made me who I am. I want you to know what it actually costs before you say yes. What role? Hanwei walked in before Lin Feng could answer, all easy warmth, holding a script like it was a gift. Xiao He. I have something special for you. He set it on the table between us, and I remember the title on the cover, printed in gold ink, like they'd wanted it to look important. The Reckoning. This isn't underground distribution. This is a private showcase for our most valued patrons, the kind of people who could set you up for the rest of your life with a single night's work. I want the collector to headline it. Lin Feng's face had gone very still. What's the role? I asked, echoing Lin Feng's earlier question, though I already suspected I wasn't going to like the answer. Everything you've done so far, but real, Hanwei said, and smiled like that was good news. No stage tricks this time. No corn syrup, as you probably like to joke to yourself backstage. Our patrons want to see something they've never seen anywhere else, a performance where they can't possibly doubt what they're watching. And Xiao He, with the abilities you've built up, you're the only performer on my roster who could deliver something like that and still walk away. I want to describe what I felt in that moment honestly, because it would be easy to tell this story as if I recoiled immediately, horrified, uncompromised. That isn't quite true. Part of me, the part that still remembered 3 weeks behind on rent, cold noodles, the particular humiliation of being unremarkable. Heard set you up for the rest of your life and felt something close to hunger. The system had spent months teaching me to want this, contract by contract, skill by skill, and it had done its job well. For one long, ugly second, I considered saying yes. Then I thought about Bo's empty apartment. About Ada, gone the same quiet way. About the 7 names on Mei Lan's list. About Kai, Lin Feng's partner, who wasn't all the way himself anymore before he wasn't anything at all. About Yun's dry, careful voice telling me the trajectory only moves one direction. I need to think about it, I said, which was the same thing I told Mei Lan, and just as much of a lie, because I already knew what my answer was going to be. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud in that room, in front of Hanwei's easy, patient smile. Don't think too long, he said. Opportunities like this don't wait. He left the script on the table when he walked out, like he already knew I'd pick it up the second I was alone, and I did, and reading it made my hands go cold in a way none of the earlier scripts ever had. There was no character description for the collector's opponent in The Reckoning. Just a line, subject to be provided. No name. No backstory. Nothing to make him a person instead of an ingredient. I went to Yun that night, and I found her exactly where I somehow expected to. Waiting outside my building again, like she'd known I'd come looking before I knew it myself. They want me to actually kill someone, I said, before she could greet me. For an audience. And call it a performance. She didn't look surprised. That's what The Reckoning always was, whenever the cult revived it under a new name. A showcase. A harvest, dressed up as theater, for the patrons wealthy enough to fund the resonance node's upkeep in exchange for watching something the rest of the world isn't allowed to see. How do I stop it? You have 3 choices, as far as I understand them, she said, and she counted them off like she'd turned this over in her own mind many times, preparing for the moment someone finally asked her this exact question. You can run, and hope the system doesn't follow you the way it followed the 6 who tried before you and failed. You can go to the authorities, though I'd remind you the authorities are part of what's protecting this. Or you can go to the source. The source? The resonance node under Elysium. The one the cult's remaining architects used to anchor the ritual. If it's disrupted at the moment of a harvest, while the reckoning is actually being performed, the echo the ritual is trying to collect has nowhere to go. It rebounds. It can break the connection between host and system permanently, instead of feeding it. She hesitated. It can also kill the host, if the disruption isn't managed carefully. I won't pretend otherwise. You're telling me my best option might still get me killed. I'm telling you all your options might get you killed, Xiao He. I'm sorry, that's true. I've spent a long time trying to find a version of this story where it isn't, and I haven't found one yet. Her paper-dry voice cracked, just slightly, on the last few words. But it's the only option I know of that stops the ritual from simply moving on to its next host once you're gone. If you want to actually end this, and not just survive it, that's the price. Have you ever seen anyone actually do it? Disrupt one, and live? Once, she said, after a pause long enough that I understood the answer cost her something. A long time ago. It's part of why I still believe it's possible at all, and part of why I've never been able to forgive myself for how many I let try it without enough preparation afterward. She looked at me steadily. I won't let that happen to you if I can help it. That's the only promise I can make you. I brought Mei Lan and Lin Feng together the next day, in a room none of us had ever met in before, a cheap rented office above a noodle shop in Ursa that Mei Lan swore wasn't on anyone's surveillance list. It was strange, watching the three of them size each other up, the investigator, the rival, the old woman who used to serve the thing we were now trying to destroy. Strange, and also the first time since the system spoke to me that I felt like I was standing with people instead of performing for them. Mei Lan and Lin Feng didn't trust each other at first, and I understood why. She'd spent months treating everyone connected to Hanwei's productions as a potential source or a potential suspect, and he'd spent years assuming anyone asking questions about the industry was either a rival production trying to poach clients or an official angling for a bigger bribe. Your bureau, Lin Feng said, the moment introductions were finished. Forgive me if I don't immediately hand you names. You're a performer with a dead partner and no closed case file to show for it, Mei Lan said, without missing a beat. Forgive me if I don't immediately assume your discretion has served you well so far. They didn't like each other for most of that first meeting. But by the end of it, something had shifted. Not warmth, exactly, but the particular respect two careful people develop for each other once they realize they've both been keeping the same kind of secrets for the same kind of reasons. The showcase is in 6 days, Lin Feng said. Hanwei's already sent the invitations. I've seen the guest list. Half of Elysium's oversight committee is on it, which tells you everything about who's been looking the other way. Then we use that, Mei Lan said. If the Bureau's own oversight committee is in that room when the ritual activates, and I can document it, that's not just evidence anymore. That's an entire scandal too big for anyone to bury. Assuming we survive documenting it, Lin Feng said. Assuming that, yes. Yun laid out the location of the resonance node, drawn from memory onto a napkin, in the same careful, unhurried hand she used for everything. It sits beneath the showcase venue itself. They always build these theaters over the old sites, whether they admit it or not. The stage is the anchor. Xiao He, when the ritual reaches its peak, you'll feel it the way you felt every contract complete, except larger, sharper. That's the moment. That's the only moment the disruption can work. Disrupted how? You reject the role, she said simply. Not run from it. Not refuse to perform it. Stand inside it, fully, at the exact height of the ritual, and choose. Consciously, completely, not to become it. The system was built to read intention as much as action. It cannot process a host who gives it everything and still says no. It sounded, when she said it out loud, like something closer to a philosophy than a plan. I didn't love my odds. None of us pretended we did. What's my part, Lin Feng asked, besides the layout? You're on the guest list too, aren't you? Mei Lan said. As talent, if not as a patron? Hanwei likes showing off more than one star at a private event. I could be there. Then you're there to get me close enough to document the ritual itself, and to get Xiao He out afterward if the disruption doesn't kill him outright. She said it without flinching, and I noticed neither of them flinched either, and I understood that all three of them had already made peace, in their own separate ways, with how badly this could go. The 6 days passed faster than I expected, and slower than I wanted. I performed my part for Hanwei the entire time. Eager, ambitious, a young man thrilled at the opportunity he'd been handed, while Mei Lan built her case in the shadows and Lin Feng fed her details about the venue's layout, and Yun taught me, in fragments, in my kitchen, late at night, what it might feel like to stand at the center of a ritual and refuse it. Hanwei nearly caught us once, on the fourth day, when he arrived at the theater early and found Lin Feng and me talking in low voices in the wings, closer together than two performers who were supposed to still barely tolerate each other had any business standing. "Rehearsing?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that made both of us go carefully casual at the same moment, an instinct we hadn't planned and didn't need to. "Discussing blocking," Lin Feng said, easily, already stepping back into the version of himself that had spent years being careful in front of this exact man. Xiao He wanted a second opinion on his stage presence for the showcase. I told him it needed work. Hanwei looked between us for a beat too long, and I felt the old fear again, the one I'd been carrying since Bo's empty apartment, that he already knew everything, that this whole plan was a performance being staged for an audience of one man who'd built his entire career on knowing exactly what was real. "Good," he said finally. "I want him sharp for Friday." And he walked on, and neither of us breathed normally again until he was gone. "You won't have time to think," Yun told me, the night before the showcase. "Whatever you decide, you have to decide it before you ever walk onto that stage. There's no room to change your mind once the echo starts moving." "And if I can't do it? If I'm not strong enough?" "Then you become the next name on Mei Lan's list, and the ritual finds a new host, and someone else sits where you're sitting now, asking the same question." She said it without cruelty, only the same flat honesty she'd given me every time. "I can't promise you'll succeed, Xiao He. I can only tell you that not trying guarantees the worse outcome." I thought, that night, about the college student I'd been 3 weeks behind on rent, eating cold noodles, desperate for anything that would make his life feel less small. I thought about how easy it had been to say yes to that first contract, how good it had felt to finally be someone people wanted. I understood, sitting in my kitchen the night before the reckoning, that the system hadn't lied to me, not exactly. It had given me everything it promised. It had just never mentioned the bill. The showcase venue in Elysium looked, from the outside, like nothing more than an elegant private theater, the kind wealthy families rented for anniversaries and retirements. Inside, the audience was smaller than I expected, maybe 40 people, seated in a horseshoe around a raised stage, dressed the way people dress when they've never once had to worry about money, watching me with the calm, hungry patience of people who already knew, roughly, what they were about to see. I recognized two faces from Nova's official broadcasts among them, officials whose names I'd heard read aloud on the evening news for entirely different reasons, and something in me went very cold understanding exactly how far this reached. Hanwei introduced me from the wings, using the collector's name, not mine, and the audience applauded like I was a magician about to perform a trick they'd paid a great deal to watch. The victim for the reckoning was a man I didn't know, brought in by Hanwei's people, drugged calm, seated in a chair at center stage under a light rig to make everything that happened there look intentional, artistic, worth the price of admission. I understood, looking at him, why Yun had never let herself believe this could be stopped from outside the ritual. There was no clean way to intervene from the audience. The only door in was the one built for me. I found Lin Feng's eyes near the back of the horseshoe, where he'd positioned himself exactly where he'd told Mei Lan he would, and he gave me a small, steady nod, the kind of nod you give someone right before both of you do something you can't take back. I felt it the way Yin said I would, the echo flux rising the moment I stepped fully into the role, sharper and larger than any contract before it, like the difference between a candle and a furnace. The system's notification bloomed in the corner of my vision, bigger and brighter than I'd ever seen it. Final contract, The Reckoning. Complete the performance. Reward, Ascension. For one long, terrible second, I wanted it. I want to be honest about that, one last time, because I think the honesty is the only thing that makes what happened next mean anything. Every part of me that had learned to crave applause, to crave the warm, certain feeling of being wanted, reached for that contract like it was the answer to every cold night I'd ever spent believing I was unremarkable. And then I thought of Bo's empty apartment. Of Ada, taken the same quiet way. Of 7 names on a list I'd never see. Of Kai, who wasn't all the way himself anymore before he wasn't anything at all. Of Yun, standing on cold sidewalks for months, trying to undo one small piece of what she'd helped build a lifetime ago. I stood at the center of that stage, under that light, with the echo flux roaring through me sharper than it had ever been, and I said, out loud, to no audience that could possibly understand what I meant by it. No. I didn't run from the role. I didn't refuse to perform it. I stood inside it completely, felt every ounce of what it wanted to make of me, and refused, at the exact height of it, to become it. I won't pretend I remember the next several seconds clearly. What I understand of it, I understand secondhand, from what Melan and Lin Feng told me afterward, and from what Jun explained once I was well enough to ask. The echo, denied a host willing to complete it, rebounded through the resonance node the way Yun said it would. Violently, and visibly, enough that the lights in the theater failed, enough that 30 of Elysium's most protected officials found themselves scrambling out of a suddenly dark private venue in a panic that Melan had, by then, already made sure was being documented by people she trusted, cameras she'd planted in the wings that ran on their own power and didn't need the theater's failing lights to keep recording. The man in the chair survived. That mattered to me more than almost anything else that happened that night. I collapsed. I was told I stopped breathing for close to a minute before Lin Feng, of all people, got to me first and refused to let anyone else touch me until I started again on my own. The system's notification, the last thing I remember seeing before I lost consciousness, didn't read like a victory or a defeat. It read like something closing. Connection terminated. Nothing more than that. No reward, no penalty, no dramatic final message. Just an ending, plain and unglamorous, the way most real endings are. I woke up 2 days later in a room I didn't recognize, with Yun sitting beside the bed reading something on a tablet, and the first thing she said to me, when she noticed my eyes were open, was simply, "You're still yourself." That's the part one wasn't sure of. Hanwei disappeared before the Bureau's actual investigators. The ones Melan trusted, not the ones who'd been protecting him, could bring him in. I don't know where he went. Part of me doesn't want to know. The scandal that followed, once Melan's evidence made its way past the officials who'd have preferred it state buried, cost 11 members of the Oversight Committee their positions, and shut down 4 of Tenebrous' private venues within the month. It didn't shut down all of it. I've stopped expecting it ever will. Some appetites don't disappear just because you take away one supplier. The recovered footage from that night became, in a strange and uncomfortable irony, the most watched piece of media in Eridoria that year, not as entertainment, but as evidence, played on Nova's official broadcasts as proof of exactly what the entertainment industry had been hiding underneath its glittering surface. I didn't watch it. I've never been able to bring myself to. Lin Feng left the industry entirely. Last I heard, he was teaching ordinary, legitimate theater to teenagers in Ursa, the kind of work that will never make anyone famous and never once threatened to take anything from them either. He told me, the last time we spoke, that he thought that was probably the point. He still visits Kai's grave every year, on the anniversary, and the first year after the showcase, he asked me to come with him, and I did, and neither of us said very much, and I think that was exactly what he needed from that afternoon. Yun told me she was going looking for the next resonance node before anyone else found a new host to feed it. I asked if I could help. She said no, gently, the way you'd tell a recovering patient not to run a marathon. You gave enough, she said. Let someone else carry it for a while. She still writes to me sometimes, brief letters with no return address, telling me almost nothing about where she is or what she's found, only that the search continues, and that I shouldn't wait up for better news than that. Melan still calls me sometimes, when a case reminds her of the 7 names she never got to save in time. I don't think she'll ever entirely forgive herself for the ones she lost before she found me. I've stopped trying to talk her out of that, because I understand the feeling better than I'd like to. She was promoted, eventually, to head a small unit inside the Bureau specifically tasked with investigating Tenebrous' remaining black markets, and I like to think that's its own kind of ending, even if it isn't a clean one. I still catch myself, sometimes, missing it. The applause. The certainty of being wanted. 3 weeks behind on rent feels like a different life now, but I remember exactly how it felt, and some nights that memory is stronger than I'd like to admit out loud. I went back to Ursa Polytechnic. I finished the degree I'd been failing to care about before any of this started. Jean, my old roommate, still doesn't know most of what actually happened that year. I told him, eventually, a version of the truth vague enough to satisfy him without frightening him, and he accepted it the way he'd accepted everything else about that stretch of my life, without pushing. My mother knows more than he does, though not everything. She asked me once, not long after, whether the consulting work I'd mentioned on the phone had anything to do with the scandal that had been on every broadcast that spring. I told her it did. I didn't tell her how much. Some things, I've decided, are mine to carry alone, and I think she understood that without needing me to say it out loud. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with the degree. I know I'm not going back to any stage that asks me to blur the line between what's real and what's performed, not even for money I used to think would fix everything. I turned down 2 offers from legitimate Nova theaters in the months afterward, both of them curious about the young performer at the center of the biggest entertainment scandal in a decade, both of them promising me exactly the kind of stardom I would have killed, 3 weeks behind on rent, to be offered. I said no to both. I think that's the first time in my life I've said no to something that wanted me, purely because I decided I didn't want it back. I think about the old woman's warning more than I think about almost anything else from that year, that the trajectory only moves in one direction, that fame built on convincing an audience you've become something you haven't, is fame that eventually asks you to actually become it. I think I understand, now, in a way I didn't when I first heard her say it, that the scariest part was never the villain I learned to play. It was how easy it was to want to keep playing him.